Hello, friends. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Quaker Take. I'm joined today by friend Debbie. Thanks for coming.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Great, great. Debbie and I are going to be talking about silence. So, silence plays a pretty important part in our friends meeting, right? But silence has different
Mhm.
sort of connotations, I think, and means different things to different people. So let's talk about it. Any initial thoughts about silence, Debbie, that you want to kick us off with?
Well, I'm a Quaker, and so I see it in a Quaker context. Um, my favorite quote is from my third kid, who was trying to explain why it is that we worship in silence to a friend. And he said, well, Quakers just talk all the time. It takes God to shut them up.
That can be true. That can be
Yeah.
true.
And of course, it's not silence per se. We're waiting. We go into what's called expectant waiting, which is a form of waiting worship. And what we're waiting for is the connection with the divine, whatever you want to call that. Some people call it spirit or the creator or the center of the universe, their own center, whatever. We are trying for that click. We are seeking spirit and trying to connect with that of God in ourselves and in each other. And that requires a lot of attention,
Mhm.
the kind of attention you don't necessarily have when you're talking.
Right. Yes, it's quite intentional. My first experience with Quaker meeting around the silence, I didn't really know what to expect, and so I arrived a little bit late at the friends meeting that we both attend, and I peep in through the window, and everybody's just kind of sitting and I was thinking they must be in a prayer, and that it would
Right.
end in a minute, and it
Mhm.
just continued to go on, and so I was too self conscious to actually come in at that point because I felt like I would be like interrupting something, but it was because it was silence, and I wasn't used to that form of expression, spiritual expression,
Yeah.
which I've since sort of adapted to. But yeah, initially it was a little odd, well, not odd, but a little unusual for me because it's not what I expect from, or it wasn't what my experience had been in sort of spiritual practice as a group.
Yeah. Yes. No, every once in a while I'll open my eyes, look around, and say, this is kind of weird.
So one thing I wanted us to talk about is the Four Doors to Meeting for Worship by William Tabor. This is a
Mhm.
Pendle Hill pamphlet, and
Mhm.
for those whose Quaker practice is different than ours, or those who aren't familiar, our friends meeting loves us some pamphlets, and so pamphlets are a way that information is shared among friends, at least in our community. And this one is about meeting for worship, which touches on the concept of silence. And in the introduction to this, he talks about a communion, about the communion of silence. And I had never really thought of it as the communion in the Christian sense,
Mhm.
because we don't do the communion in the sense that many other Christian denominations do, which is like a meal together where it's a ritualistic meal. We don't
Right.
in our practice we don't do that. We
Right.
don't have a communion in that sense.
Right.
So I had never really thought of our silence together as a communion, but it actually sort of feels that way when you're participating in it.
Yeah. My understanding of typical Christian communion, which is not very deep, I don't understand it to any good level, but they're eating the body of Christ and drinking his blood, right? Which
Mhm.
sort of an off-putting concept, but I assume that means that you were trying to take that of God in and to become one with it, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that that shows up in a lot of different faiths. They may use different words or different approaches. The Bill Tabor's pamphlet is one way to frame what we're doing in worship and how to bring that worship into your life and into the world. But there are a lot of different frames. I'm not saying this is the one that we're supposed to be using, but it's one that's been around for a while and which a lot of us have read and taken note of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that part about the communion and taking in the Jesus or taking in the Spirit in that sort of ritualistic way. It was sort of timely when I was reading this pamphlet and that concept of the waiting worship as being a form of communion. I had been reading C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis had been talking about sort of some of the essentials of Christianity, and the essentials that he mentioned in the book Mere Christianity we don't do. I thought.
Right.
And one of them was communion, the Lord's Supper as such. And then when I read this, I thought, oh, I guess we are doing it in a certain form, just in a different sort of more abstract, not so ritualistic form. But so yeah, silence. The silence. So the one thing that I've thought about as far as the silence goes is that silence can be, it seems like it can be a very individual thing, meaning when you're silent, you're not speaking to each other.
Right.
You're sort of within yourself, but you're actually, in the Quaker sense, you're actually within yourself, within the divine, or you're trying to connect with the divine.
Right.
And so one sort of illustration of that I thought I have found very meaningful has an experience that happened to me a while back. I was in a Quaker space with other friends meeting around a topic of interest to us, but this meeting was open to anyone. And we have another friend that comes in to our little meeting we were having on this topic, very angry. And this friend was obviously very upset with what we were doing, and expressed that like openly, like immediately when this friend came in. It was sort of almost like an attack, and of course we were a bit stunned, and we were angry too, because when you're attacked that way, the natural reaction is to become defensive yourself and like, who are you to come in? You didn't have to come here.
Right.
But what ended up happening, the facilitator of that meeting just said, let's remove into silence. And so we did, including the friend who had come in angry. We all went into silence, a good bit of silence, a good probably 10 minutes of it.
Good.
And when we came out of the silence and started to speak again to each other, the situation had become diffused at that point. So while we still did not agree with each other, we interacted with each other more in sort of a form of love or understanding. And so we were able at that point to disagree without being angry and defensive and hurt. And that was just a beautiful experience for me. Because I feel like if that practice were taken sometimes on a daily basis, with not just in friends groups, but in work situations or in interpersonal sort of interactions, that somebody that just cuts you off in traffic, even you actually have a discussion with them, but that sort of taking that moment to try to reconnect, to connect then to spirit through silence and through quiet, can be a very powerful thing. But as the pamphlet, as the pamphlet mentions, it takes some practice, right?
Yes, it does. But that silence gives you an opportunity for some self-awareness, to try to figure out, okay, why is this thing bothering me so much? What's getting triggered here? and to try to think of why is this person so upset? Is it what's happening, or is it something deeper? And what are the benefits to listening to that other point of view? If we can get ourselves away from thinking that we know all the answers and that our way is the right way, then it can be quite a growing experience. I sometimes go up to Capitol Hill to do some lobbying, usually on behalf of Friends Committee of National Legislation, but other lobbying positions against war, or torture, or other forms of violence. And I always start those meetings with some silence. And I'm amazed at the difference it makes in whoever we are meeting with. They're a little stunned, and they're used to a moment of silence, which is actually a moment, right? And we're dead serious about the silence. And so we're there for, 10 minutes of a 30-minute meeting. We're in silence, and he's kind of looking around, and then, they start to sink into it. And I think that's because we're in community. And the thing that happens in community, in silence, you're talking about it being individual. Yes, it is, but it's also community. And in a really good meeting for worship, we are gathered. We can just feel that gathering together in community. And something very powerful is going on, and it has nothing to do with me as an individual. It's that we are all being well used by Spirit.
Yes, I have been in a few meetings that have become what we might call gathered, and it's an amazing experience, because there is this. It kind of is like, I was telling a friend, a non Quaker friend of mine once, about an experience like that, and I said it's kind of like, whenever your team wins, like that feeling that you get with sports games sometimes, where you feel like you're part of this, like these are I belong with these people, like yay, go blue, or whatever your team's color is.
Yeah.
But you feel that feeling of being part of a community, or a part of a society. And a quiet Quaker meeting of a few dozen people or less even can actually have that same sort of feeling, like we are all sort of connected somehow.
Yeah.
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 And then the messages. So messages too, coming out of the silence. For those who are not Quakers, the silence is broken periodically, often, but not always, by messages from folks who feel that they're being led to say something to the group, to share something with the group. And messages are also a very important part of the meeting, are part of silent worship that we do, the waiting worship that we do, because I don't know, it's something about the message coming out of the silence is more attention, and then it's followed usually by even more silence, because like the faux pas among friends would be to like stagger right after one message to jump on and give another message. We space those out typically. And so we have time between the messages to sit again in silence for whatever message was just delivered, before we get another message that's on a completely different topic most of the time. A lot of the time, it's on a completely different thing. But at the end of it all feels cohesive to me.
Yeah, it can. But it's not a discussion.
Yes.
We're not discussing something.
Or an argument or a debate. It's,
Right. And and hopefully you are being led by Spirit and not in PR, although that can happen.
That can happen, yeah. And I wanted to bring that up because in here in this pamphlet, he goes into, we'll get to it here in a minute, but he goes through the first door of worship, and then he talks about practicing, and in the part of the pamphlet about practicing, he's got like 4, I guess, strategies. But but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Let's talk now, though, about the four doors. About the doors. So when he says doors here, the first door, I don't think we'll have time to talk about all the doors, but the first door is this weekly, it's your daily spiritual practice, which I don't think I ever did before coming to the Friends. And even though I had been involved with some other spiritual practices, I just never, I don't know, I didn't practice it as much as I do now. For one, I didn't know how to connect to spirit through silence, per se. But the four doors, do you know all four doors off the top?
Yeah, I probably do, just because I'm about to teach it tomorrow. But my favorite part of the first door, which is the door before the preparation for meeting for worship, which starts Sunday afternoon, right, and goes until next Sunday morning, is what Quakers traditionally refer to as the time of retirement. That sounds great. And it's typically in the morning, but some people prefer to do it at night. I suppose you could do it midday, but usually midday, I'm just so caught up with everything else that I don't have time. But the practice is that you take a few minutes to, up to an hour, depending on how your life happens to be happening right now, in which you reflect on what's going on, what's really going on inside you, and where is spirit, and how to connect with that. I usually do a little bit of spiritual reading, which can be anything from, Quaker literature to some mystic. I love the mystics, to, some of the more current things. I love the theologian Rachel Held Evans. She was just this amazing evangelical Christian and very down to earth. And so I love to read her. So I do a little bit of spiritual reading. And then I journal, which I got started with about 20 years ago when a friend talked me into it. And, half of the journal is, okay, this is what I have to do today. It's my to-do list. But it's also a place to capture some reflections or to try to address the important things that are going on in my life as opposed to the urgent things. Because the urgent things just grab you by the throat and carry you around all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the important things, the way your mind is starting to see something, if you can kind of record that helps me to stay focused on it and to see that as what I'm being called to do, as opposed to what I'm being yanked to do, right?
Right.
And then this year I'm back to keeping a gratitude journal, which I just write down people or things for which I am grateful that particular day, and it tends to be the people I talked to the day before, who are just so wonderful. And I also have a list of people or situations that I'm holding in the light, like Gaza right now. That's always on the list, and various friends and friends of friends. And then I just spend some time holding them in the light. Best part of my day. Just makes my day. Because I feel close to them, and I feel the presence of the Holy Spirit pouring down, pouring down, pouring down on them like light.
That is fantastic. Yeah, I most of the time I think I spend in the morning. I live like on the 8th floor, and I got some windows like for a wall, and it's in the morning. It's having coffee or tea. It's sort of a way to, I don't know, I don't even know how to put it into words. Reflect in the morning.
Yeah.
It's usually quiet, and I give myself time. It usually is about 30 minutes before I start work, to just sort of get connected, feel connected,
Mm-hmm.
and try to carry that through the day. And it's not always easy. What I'm trying to practice now, as far as like develop, is trying to put this sort of practice more in my everyday life around, for example, work. When I'm
Mhm.
about to go into a meeting or a discussion or a problem solving session, um, obviously I'm not doing this with other people because we're not at a Quaker meeting. We work for a giant corporation. But for me
Right.
personally, I'm trying to get into the habit of getting into that space before these kinds of events, because there are all sorts of little choices that get made throughout the day as far as how you treat others, and
Mhm.
how you react to situations. If you're making things worse, if you're making things better, if you're being a peacemaker versus being a source of discord. uh,
Mhm.
these sorts of things happen all the time, and it's a good practice, I think, to try to get into. Now, it does take practice to do, because
Yes.
um, it's very easy to get caught up in the moment, and when someone's upset because something's happened, or you're upset because something's happened that you didn't agree with, and you just sort of uh, stewing on that.
Mhm.
Try to find that space there in situations like that, kind of like in a day-to-day
Mhm. Mhm.
basis.
Yeah, and any amount that we can do is, an improvement. Yeah. I remember when I had little kids, I tried to carve out 10 minutes. And, a lot of days I didn't make the 10 minutes, but boy, they were great 10 minutes.
Well, I remember you mentioned kids. So my dad in the '60s had a reel to reel. He got this reel to reel tape recorder.
Okay.
You remember those that,
Yes.
um, and he recorded people. So he recorded my sister and her friend Lori Ann had a fight.
Oh.
They had gotten into a fight, and they were sniveling, both of them still sniffing and sniveling. And my dad
Mhm.
recorded his interaction with them, and he lets both of them tell their side of the. It was such a peacemaking moment. Actually,
Mhm.
he lets each of them tell their side of the story, and he gives them time, because they're little kids and they're
Mhm.
crying, or they have been crying, but he gives them time to like compose their little story and give
Yeah.
their version of what happened. And then one of them tries to interrupt, and he's like, no, this is her.
Mhm.
She's telling
Mhm.
her story. And I have carried that sort of peacemaking lesson sort of like all through my life, as far as like, but it's not always easy to do. But
Mhm.
nations and people, grown-ups, are also still those little kids, like wanting to tell their side is the true side.
Right.
um, and then he being able to sort of be the middle person there, and at
Yeah.
the end of it having them make up. Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, kind of off topic, but that reminded me of that story, and I think I always enjoy remembering
Oh, yeah. Good for your dad.
that. Yeah, and it made a great for a great reel to reel. And we have lost those. We had those reel to reels for years, and my sister's like 60 something at this point. Um, but it was always funny to listen to that
Mhm.
argument replayed, and I don't remember what it was about. But about the regular practices during the week. So we've talked about a couple of those, and um, it's actually talked about a bit in the book, as far as another thing that I thought of with that first practice, which is the first practice is called, let's see, just this regular spiritual practice, like doing something I guess try to make it a ritual, or try to make it a
Mhm.
routine. Um, when I turned 50, I decided I would have this life coach session.
Oh, my.
Yeah, I had this life coach session with an actor. So this guy had been like an actor. He'd gone to acting school, and he
Mhm.
gave life coaching things based on acting,
Okay.
because actors are able to put themselves in all kinds of emotions because that's what we
Mm-hmm.
do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had these little tricks that you could do. And so, like for like love or feeling
Mm-hmm.
loved, it was to remember, like to write down this list of times in your life when you felt love or loved by someone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of like and sit with that.
Mm-hmm.
So in our workshop we would sit with that like emotion and silence, basically just sitting with silence, thinking of that period, that those events that we had written down. And and then we were supposed to, and then there were several others. There was like freedom, gratitude, and you would document these experiences from your life where you felt each of these emotions. And when you remember those, you feel the emotion again.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
as you practice that, so you're supposed to practice that all week, like,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually you're able to sort of access love in without
Mm-hmm.
going back to that memory. You can just
Mm-hmm.
love. And I
That's
don't
a
know,
cool idea.
yeah, it was a great sort of exercise. And
Cool.
um, I
As opposed to feeling resentment or victimizing or suffering or
mhm,
in anger.
yeah.
Yeah.
So putting yourself in the mood you want to be in. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's pretty cool. So the second thing in the second, let's see, the first one was was the ritual. The
What's the
second,
door before? And it's what you can do through the week to keep yourself connected with spirit. And if you get in practice with that and you bring that to meeting for worship, which is the second door, that strengthens that meeting. You can tell when there are people in the room who have a lot of practice that it's easier for the rest of us to center because they're so centered.
right, right. Um, the pamphlet mentions if if this daily activity is missing,
Mm-hmm.
and a friend can find themselves at meeting for worship needing the silence and then actually becoming annoyed by messages or
Mm-hmm.
by um, messages that are sort of not felt to be spirit led but NPR led, as you mentioned. um, and I thought that was kind of interesting because that could be a sign if these sorts of things are interrupting your silence, that are taking you out of the stream, he calls it,
Mm-hmm.
then that could be a sign that you need to work on your stream in the week more
Mm-hmm.
and less on meeting for worship on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to judge people because everybody's got different lives, and some people only have that
No.
that hour on Sunday. Um, but it's an interesting thing. Interesting. I had never really thought of that in that sense, as far as
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah, there are days when the message just seems like a gigantic interruption, and it's like, oh my God, somebody's talking. Yeah, I'm in the middle of something here. Yeah.
yeah,
But our wonderful friend Faith Williams, who's now moved, she always says that everybody has tigers fighting inside them, and you have to remember that's who you're dealing with. You're dealing with somebody who has tigers fighting inside them. So yeah, no judgment,
yeah,
because you also have tigers fighting inside you.
true, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. um, so one other thing about the word that he's talking about here, as far as practicing, I wondered about. He talks about words, like saying like a word, I guess like a power word, like love.
Oh yeah.
And but I'm wondering about things like poetry or
Mhm.
lyrics to songs, other
Mhm.
sorts of avenues that can put us in spirit that are not silence per se.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because if you're reading a poem, even if you're reading it to yourself, I mean, the act of reading a poem is like an intellectual. It's not sitting in silence listening. It's reading a.
Mhm.
But nevertheless, it can put you in that that
Yeah. That a lot of people have little practices. I always have a song in my head, always, doesn't matter where I am. And but in meeting for worship, I'd like to pay attention to, okay, what song showed up, and I wonder why that showed up.
oh yeah.
Yeah, which can be interesting. Joe Izzo has certain passages that he's memorized from various spiritual leaders, and he kind of repeats those to himself. Um, was another member of our meeting who always did the Lord's Prayer. She loved the Lord's Prayer. I often have a Bible verse in my head, and I can. It's always only halfway there. I spend a lot of time thinking, "What's the rest of it?" And sometimes I cheat and look it up just to try to figure out what is that? What's that trying to tell me?
Yeah, my sister gave me a little. It's like a little miniature easel, and
Mm,
it's got these little cards on it, and there are a couple of lines from different psalms.
mm,
She gave me that in last Christmas, and
mm,
it's kind of like a. I've been kind of going through those.
mhm,
One up like
mhm.
it's kind of a desktop thing, because they're kind of poetry. The psalms are,
Yeah, they are. They
and
are. The songs.
there's usually there is always actually a message there um,
Yeah.
in the psalm. So
Yeah. It's interesting to see which one is speaking to you and which one isn't.
yeah,
Yeah, and why that is. Yeah, this thing happens when you sit down and you're so purposeful. You've come to meeting for worship. You found your shoes. You got there on time or pretty much on time. You're sitting down with all these people. Everybody is going into silence. And in your head, it's when I go to the grocery store, I need to remember to pick up I wonder why the car is making that little rattle. And what did she mean when she said that thing to me? And you know what I really should have said to her back, but I didn't. But what I really should have said to her, yeah. And so all of that is kind of floating around, and it reminds me of this story. Do we have time for a story?
yeah.
This is when I was younger, I worked for the National Geographic, and there was a woman there who the Geographic was sponsoring named Eugenie Clark, who liked to study sharks. She was really into sharks. And I was working with her a little bit. I was her researcher. And so we were talking about sharks. And she said, "Oh, Debbie, what you really ought to do is you ought to come diving with me, because what I like to do is I like to hold on to the dorsal fin, which is that thing that's kind of right there at the back of the shark. I like to hold onto that dorsal fin. And as soon as you touch that, then the shark just takes off." And she said, "And they can go really fast. You get the ride of your life." And I said, "Jeannie, you're missing something very important here." Sharks are very dangerous and they can bite you. And she said, "Oh, no." She said, "I always dive with a clipboard." I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, so no problem." I said, "Well, what do you do with a clipboard?" And she said, "Well, when they come for you, you just sort of take the clipboard and go bop and bop them on the nose. And that distracts them, and then they take off in another direction." So when I'm in meeting for worship, I try to get my divine clipboard. And all of those little intruding thoughts come rambling through. I just spend a lot of time doing that with the clipboard.
I love that, and we're recording this on a Saturday. We've got meeting for worship tomorrow. I will put that one into practice. I have that happen too. I some weeks are different. Some weeks are better than others, but
Right.
I will. Yeah, sometimes I'll go into what I've got on Monday coming up, or who I'm going to talk to after meeting about whatever topic, or
Yeah.
something that's not actually participating with Spirit. It's participating in my daily
Yeah.
life. So I'm going to get
Yeah.
my chart clipboard out tomorrow.
And then back to the kind of a mantra thing. Marcel Martin, who was my prayer teacher up at Pendle Hill, which is a Quaker retreat outside of Philadelphia, she asked all of us to come up with one in our head, which could be anything. I mean, you could breathe in love and breathe out peace. You could bring in receive and breathe out let go. Anything that speaks to you. The one that I picked is open, clear. Um, which is not an exciting mantra, but I've said it so often, that at this point, as soon as I do that, my brain goes, oh, time to center, and then I can center down. So, it's a good little practice.
Yeah, that's a good practice too. Um, I have heard of like in with light, out with darkness. Which seems a bit dramatic, maybe, but I kind of like the in with what was it? In with something and out with peace. In with love.
Yeah. Breathe in love, breathe out peace.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. The third sort of category that he has in the first door, as far as a weekly practice, is cultivating beauty.
Mm.
Cultivating beauty and experiencing wonder. And there is a quote from this book I read recently, so called The Nature of Consciousness, Essays on the Unity of Mind and Matter. It's by Robert Spira. And in one of the essays in that book, he talked about how, well, he's talking about like a unitary consciousness, but for our framework as Quakers, let's say spirit. Spirit
Okay.
is actually love, and that manifests everywhere. So it's everywhere all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and all we have to do,
Like the film.
yeah. So how we feel that to each other and to spirit and to animals is through love, but how we feel that divine love, how we experience that in objects is through beauty,
Mm.
sense of beauty. And so it
Mm.
sort of reminded me of this suggestion as far as a weekly practice of like finding beauty, because
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of finding beauty is actually still connecting to that sort of divine love.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And so much easier to do outdoors.
it is, one of the reasons why I like sitting by my window in the morning when I'm having my coffee or tea and getting ready to start my day. There's like a little park. Plus, everybody's going to work. I don't live far from like a metro
Oh.
stop, and kids are great. The parents are. There's a bus stop for school.
Mm-hmm.
The metro's down this way. The bus stop for school is down that way. So see these kids going to the bus stop for school. See the people going to work to go to the metro. And then there's a park right below that I can see from here
Nice.
that
Nice.
people are walking their dogs. And
Yeah.
if it's snowing, if it's raining, it's
Yeah.
just a really good way to connect, because it's that whole world out there out my window.
Mm-hmm.
People, there's nature, birds are usually flying by. So it's a good way for me.
Yeah.
Luciano, my partner, says I should go actually walk in the park more.
Well, okay.
No.
That seems drastic, but sure.
But I'm like, well, I can see the park. It's very pretty.
Yeah.
But that practice of beauty, that's another way that I think like poetry or inspirational reading, the beautiful writings that people have made, is a way to connect with spirit during the week that can be very important.
And some people do like a walking meditation
Mhm.
where they'll go out and take a walk, and that is a way to kind of center while you're walking.
Yeah.
And other people use yoga.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, Qigong or, any number of physical moving practices. I think Bill Foskett does it by biking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the fourth weekly practice he talks about is spiritual community, and this is something we've talked a lot about at our friends meeting, as far as trying to foster a spiritual community. That's actually why we meet, right? We together,
Yes.
And we form a community together, and then we have so Quakers are very outward focused in some ways, I think, as well as inward focused. So we have a focus to the outside world where we're trying to like live. We're trying to create the world we want through our actions. But then we've also got to pay attention to our individual community or
Mhm.
our community.
Mhm.
So that balance, though, what do you think about that balance? How, as far as inward focus versus outward focus, and what's the balance there?
Yeah, well, there are people in the meeting who I think of as mystics. That they are very focused on their spiritual journey, and which is wonderful. And they tend to be reflective, um, and have a kind of a deeper understanding. And so I really value them. And there are also people in our meeting who don't have one mystical thought in their entire brains, and aren't particularly interested in that. What they're out for is social justice. Thank you very much. And that's what they want to be working on. And we want to support that because it would be nice to have some social justice. So, we are in the midst of a culture of I call it the economy of scarcity. We have in our culture, we believe that there's just a limited amount of anything at all. And so we all have to be individually scrambling for those things. And we think that of that scrambling, that competition is a very good thing that foments even more better stuff, right?
Right.
And whereas as Quakers live in an economy of generosity and compassion and caring, and we don't believe that we're going to run out of anything important like God's love.
Hmm.
Really aren't a lot of limits on God's love or kindness. Not going to run out of kindness. It's always there. It's always available. And so we're living very countercultural lives. And as such, we need each other. This stuff is hard. It is hard to live this very different set of values in a place that emphasizes individualism and victimhood. Somehow everybody's a victim and number one and competition. It's hard to be a kind, caring, sharing, generous person in the midst of all of that. So yeah,
Yeah, very
we
challenging. The world, it feels very angry to me and very um, rage. It feels like social media, and we didn't really talk about social media as far as that being a noise that in
mhm,
the world that is beneficial in the sense of it connects us and it
right,
gives us information, and it's gone are the days of card catalog and having to, like, we can look up everything, anything at any moment. This is all
right,
good, but it comes with a cost, and the
yeah,
cost is noise, and it has seemed to have brought about a lot of rage and anger to the
and
point,
fear,
and
lots of
fear,
fear,
fear that.
right, fear of each other as opposed to connection.
And the paradox of that is that the social media has brought us so much closer together, but it created the fear. We got more scared of each other when we got closer together. We
Yeah,
seem to fear each other,
it
and that,
created a lot of silos.
yeah.
Yeah,
So trying to live our values in that world
yeah,
is challenging. But I think it's more important than ever to show
yes,
or to try to cultivate that within ourselves, because when we cultivate it within ourselves, of course, we impact the world around us by how we
right,
live. So
right.
I think it's great. I mean, I think it's
Yeah,
it's definitely a challenge to for us. It's the
yeah.
challenge for us, maybe us as friends in the 21st century, is to figure out how to navigate that sort of world. Um,
Right, right.
and it's a world, the political system. I don't want to get into politics too much, but
Yes, please.
it's almost impossible to have a political discussion
No.
like we used to be able to have. And I'm not trying to glorify the days gone by, but there used to be a political discourse like on television, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't have that at all anymore. It's strictly
Well, we can't agree on the topics.
we can't even agree on the terms. Yeah,
Yeah, or
so,
the reality.
so
Yeah,
fractured, so fractured.
yeah. But on the other hand, kindness goes a long way.
Hmm. and understanding and love. You know, love
Yeah.
for each other, seeing the light of God, seeing the light of Spirit in everyone, are
Yeah.
trying to, even the one who's just like really, 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 pissed you off.
Yes.
You, uh, to stop and say, okay,
Yeah.
they're coming from this place, but this is not. This is a divine being, just like I am, and
Yeah. It's hard to remember that.
it's hard to remember that under those situations, under those circumstances. But
Yeah.
maybe that's our challenge for the 21st century. Um,
Yes.
and I think
Yeah.
people, just sort of final thoughts around the first door. We didn't get to the other three. Maybe we'll have a continuing discussion about the other doors.
Yeah.
But I see it's in our meeting. A lot of young people come that are new, that are really. There seems to be a hunger for meaning.
Yes. Yes. I think COVID did that.
Yeah.
I think that gave people the time and the space to reflect on their lives and think, is this all there is?
Hmm.
Isn't there something greater?
Right.
And they're seeking. And sometimes they come and they don't come back, and that's okay because, we didn't meet their needs. And maybe some other group will.
Right.
And sometimes they come and they stick. And sometimes they stick for a while, and then sometimes they stick for years. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the discussion around
This is fun.
silence. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, so there are three other doors to this pamphlet. So I'll put the details for this pamphlet down in the details below, and maybe we'll continue this discussion in another video at a future date.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.